Alright, so, welcome back to another review. Okay then, time to start branching off into the Dekoni Blue comparison saga. The first item on this list is the Fidelio X2HR. So I chose to compare these two because they seem to appeal to a very similar demographic, those who seek a higher quality V-shaped sound signature at a somewhat affordable price point. With the Fidelio selling at around $150 and the Dekoni Blue selling at around $200, they sit close enough to warrant this discussion. So, before we begin, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, the whole ordeal. I focus primarily on reviewing hi-fi audio products such as headphones, DACs, amps, and I'm considering the occasional meme/gaming video down the line. So, if this sounds like it'd be your cup of tea, do the deed, and let's proceed. So let's start off with the contents here. The contents are fairly straightforward. They each come with the headphone, their own detachable cable, the adapter at the amp's termination, and the box they came in. The Fidelios do come with a manual and warranty packet, while the Dekoni Blues do not. Now the cables included with the Fidelios terminate in 3.5mm and offer a 3.5mm to 1/4 inch adapter, while the Blues cable terminates in a 1/4 inch plug and feature a 1/4 inch to 3.5mm adapter. This is mostly considering Fostex and Dekoni expect you to run this off of a powerful amp due to their power requirements, and more on that later, by the way. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward here, nothing out of the ordinary. Now let's talk about their build and designs. So let's take a look at both of these. The Fidelio looks noticeably more premium than the Blues. Well, that's because they are built that way. The Fidelios do offer a far more premium build that goes above and beyond what anyone would expect out of a $150 headphone. They use a suspension strap mechanism for the headband and feature a lot of metal in the build, including the cups rings, the grills, and the dual metal yokes that go inside the headband. The Blues, on the other hand, feature a build that is mostly plastic. The only metal present here is in the yokes, a couple of screws on the edges of the headband, and if I'm not mistaken, the thin sheet of metal within the headband that allows for micro adjustments to it. If you wanted to go ahead and squeeze it in, you could do so, stretch it out, same thing. That said, the Blues cup design does allow for more of a circular rotation than the Fidelios do. And to be fair, the Blues don't necessarily feel cheap. I'd say they feel pretty good for the money, especially for a headphone that's intended to be used strictly in a desk setup at home. The Blues went with a wiring style that exposes the wire between the cup and the headband, while the Fidelio's wire is completely hidden within the yokes. Now they both offer a detachable cable, though they do vary quite a bit in terms of functionality here. Both of these headphones offer a single-sided cable coming out of the left-hand side. However, the Fidelio's cable is long and braided, while the Blues cable is short and rubberized. I should flip these around here actually. There you go. While they both offer a 3.5mm cable, the Fidelios offer a straight plug that's compatible with any other 3.5mm tip ring sleeve cable, while the Blues offer a unique twist and lock design featuring a 90-degree 3.5mm tip ring sleeve plug. They are also compatible with any other 3.5mm tip ring sleeve cable, but unless it is angled somehow, you will have it protrude from the headphone in a kinda goofy manner. So now let's talk about the comfort. Initially, I'd say they're pretty close. After a long period of time though, I do experience some issues with hot spots on the top of my head with the Blues, and I'm forced to take them off to relieve that pressure. No such things with the Fidelio though. Now despite being the heavier headphone, the Fidelios offer excellent weight distribution because of that suspension style headband and those firm yet comfortable ear pads. They make sure the headphone stays on your head and barely moves from its original spot. They're still not perfect though. I would not advise using these for on-the-go purposes. Now the inner cups on both of these are relatively narrow in terms of space. There's less space within the Fostex ear pads as opposed to the Fidelios. When I put the Blues on, I have to do like a little shimmy to get them to fit my ears inside them, even though my ears are on the smaller side of things. Not with the Fidelios. I'm able to just sit them on my head, and that is that. Regarding the wires, I'm gonna be frank, I dislike both of them for being single-sided. However, if I had to choose, I highly prefer the Fidelio's wire here because of its length, I'm able to position it so that the cable runs behind my back as opposed through my front. Now let's talk amplification here. On the THX AAA 789, I ran the Fidelios at noon on gain 1 and 10:30 on gain 2. On the other hand, I ran the Blues at 3 o'clock on gain 1, 1 o'clock on gain 2, and 10 a.m. on gain 3. So yes, clearly, there are some very notable differences between these headphones' power requirements. A bit of advice too, it is always important to make sure you're running your headphones with the cleanest power you can afford and with the most power excuse me. With the cleanest power you can afford and with the most powerful sources too. However, since the Fidelios aren't all that power hungry, you can easily choose to run them off of a mobile device and you'll be just fine, honestly. The Blues, on the other hand, are a very, very power hungry planar magnetic headphone. Listen, when switching across the various gain levels and trying to match the volume levels, I found that while I did successfully do so, the Blues overall sound is just it's infinitely more clear and smooth on the gain 3 than on gains 1 and 2. So yeah, do consider getting the most powerful amplifier you can get your hands on if you're considering these headphones at all. And now let's talk about that sound. Once again, I should mention that the following impressions were obtained without the use of any EQ or modifications to the stock sound signature. That will be discussed in the notes and observations portion of this review. Now with that out of the way, let's begin. So as usual, we begin with the bass department. Drums sound much more clean and detailed on the Fidelios than on the Blues. Now the issue with the Blues here is that they have a very prominent emphasis around the 100 Hz range, which lands right in between the sub bass and the mid bass. So I'll pull an example here. Rasputin by Boney M. Yeah, you know that one. So that emphasis causes the drums at the intro and the bass guitar to sound more full and forward than on the Fidelios. However, it really messes with the timbre of the instruments, causing them to sound too full and tube-ish. The drums sound far more realistic on the Fidelios than on the Blues, with minimal difference in presence. That bass guitar, on the other hand, experiences the biggest difference in its forwardness. The Blues make it pop in front of other instruments a whole lot more prominently than the Fidelios do. It does experience a slight difference in timbre too, going from airy and free to richer and lushful. Now to pop in a quick comparison with Get Lucky by Daft Punk. The bass guitar gets obliterated by the Blues here. On the Fidelios it sounds less forward by comparison, but far more free and airy. On the Blues it sounds almost as if you were listening to an open back headphone and then you were covering the grills with your hands, you know. That bass response is just, it's much more prominent, but it really takes a step back in terms of clarity. I can hear the bass sort of bounce around the edges of the cavernous walls, so to speak, creating the reverb in the process. Now, sub bass appears to be equal in terms of the intensity of the rumble, that is the part you feel, not hear, between these two. However, the higher end of those notes, the part that you hear, not feel, are more prominent on the Blues than on the Fidelios. Now let's talk about mids here. There is a far better balance between the vocals and the lower/higher end instruments on the Fidelios than on the Blues. That bass emphasis on the Blues tends to interfere with the rest of the spectrum quite a bit. So I'll give you an example here. Dream On, Postmodern Jukebox, mentioned it 1,000 times on the channel, but what's one more? Cellos have better detail and sound more airy on the Fidelios, but I really like this sort of syrupy timbre that the Blues give them. If you try to look past the bass notes after the 231 mark, I can actually pick up the texture of the bow moving across the string. You can hear the grit a little more clearly. You can pick up the cellist using his arm's muscles to dig into the string, you know, just into the crescendo. I thought that was a pretty nice touch. Generally speaking though, instruments sound more open and airy on the Fidelios than they do on the Blues. Because of that less congested sound, the instruments have more room to breathe and articulate a little better. They feel a little lighter. Again, the Blues just really remind me of closebacks in that regard. Now let's talk about the treble here. While both of these headphones suffer from sibilance in the consonant region, they each present it a little differently. The Fidelios present it a more traditional way, while the Blues have this sort of shine to it. While the Fidelios sibilance lingers a bit more, the Blues penetrates your ears a little deeper. You know, in the end, it's sibilance nonetheless, but I should mention it as there are some key differences in the sibilances. The general difference in treble between the Fidelios and the Blues is that while the Fidelios have the more forward and aggressive treble response, the peakiest area, the consonant range, is tied, if not exceeded, by the Blues. Other than that, instruments like cymbals and other upper percussive instruments tend to be more forward on the Fidelios. The Fidelios just seem to deliver the best of both worlds here when it comes to forwardness in relation to timbre. So I'll give a contra example here, Bangarang by Skrillex and Syra. This, on the other hand, is one of the very few examples where the aforementioned trend gets overruled. In this track, the treble response is far smoother on the Fidelios than on the blues. While I find both to be too forward to be enjoyable on this particular track, the Fidelios admittedly offer much more clarity to where I can tell what's going on in the upper end. The blues just sort of blast you with shine and shower you with disappointment. It's the auditory equivalent of getting a reflector light pointed at your eyes. It's that bad. Now let's jump into Soundstage and Imaging. So as far as the general width is concerned, the two of them are pretty close. However, you definitely notice a difference regarding how far sounds travel outward. Since the blues sound a tad more like a closed back headphone, you do sort of hear a bit of a cap being placed at the edges. On the flip side, the Fidelios allow sounds to travel inward towards your ear and then let other sounds fly off into the distance. This just happens to be the exact description of an open back headphone, by the way. And because of that key difference, the Fidelios do end up being the wider headphone in the majority of circumstances. So let's jump into an example here. Saturn Spars by Gorillaz featuring Popcorn. Now I love this track for some general track imaging, but also for just taking a trip. For some reason, people didn't really like this track as their headlining track for the Humans album. Probably because their typical fans are used to that psychedelic, depressed, angsty teen type of sound, like my heart is floating in the distance, it's made of clouds that are raining, or some, you know what I'm talking about, those kinds of lyrics. I mean, hey, I think it's excellent, but I like this. Anyways, it's got a whole lot of electronic sounds and cymbals that really splash sound everywhere. On an open back headphone like the Fidelios, this is a real treat. Something that just can't really be enjoyed on the blues. I will say this though, if the blues were an open back headphone, I think they could really shine in terms of imaging. I mean, they already happened to defeat the Fidelios in this category quite a few times, though they end up sounding a bit restrained in most cases. Just dropping a quick example of when that occurs, Rain Girl by Yaeji around the 51-second mark. On the blues, the vocals sound like they're hiding behind the pad, like you're listening to the vocals and then you just hear Yaeji like back here. And, you know, backup singers and or whatever, and it's just like back here as opposed to right here, you know what I'm saying? So let's talk about some notes and observations. I did promise some EQ settings, and here they are. So let's start with the Fidelios. Now I wasn't satisfied with the EQ settings I had set last time, so I decided to give it another go, and this is what I came up with. Now that 30Hz bass shelf is completely optional. It's there for when those bass focus tracks hit and they really benefit from that extra rumble down below. You can easily just disable that particular filter whenever a song that you prefer in stock form comes along. As for mitigating the sibilance in the higher end, I applied a pretty large but thin dip at 10 kHz, which actually mitigates the vast majority of that sibilance. Now it's not 100% gone, but dialing it down any further causes some repercussions in tracks that actually benefit from that treble emphasis. Now, as for the blues, I took another shot at that EQ from the previous video, and no matter what I do, I just can't get these to sound as agreeable as they should. That valley in the low end does eliminate about 40% of the muddiness and bloat of the bass response, and the emphasis placed on the mids does help liven up that area a little. That dip at the 10 kHz area even manages to reduce the sibilance considerably. Despite that, they still have that strange anechoic chamber sound to them. It's a plague. So to conclude here, well, as if you couldn't guess which headphone I'm going to prefer. My entire tone throughout this entire video has been nothing but hooray Fidelios for a damn good reason. The Fidelios are clean, they offer a great implementation of a V-shaped sound signature, and on top of all of that, they don't sound like muddy, thumpy ass. Again, it really makes me sad considering the Fostex drivers sound like they have incredible potential, they really do. But they're hindered by the closed back nature and this particular modding of the headphone. So that's where I'm going to end it. Coming up soon, I'm going to compare these to the HiFiMAN Sundaras and to the Modhouse Argon Mark III. So stick around if you're interested in checking that out. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. I hope this helped reach your purchasing decision, and till next week. See you around.